The views, comments, and opinions of the following program do not necessarily reflect those of Morris Media Studios, MorrisMediaLive.com, or its affiliates. Listener discretion is advised.
Good day, good day. Greetings to you from Los Angeles, California. So we're glad that you're joining us today at Faith Without Borders. I'm your host, Pastor Calvin Sauls, and what a joy to have you joining us from wherever you are. As you know, here at Faith Without Borders, we seek to engage in thought-provoking and solutions-oriented conversation, looking at some of the critical issues facing our community, both locally, nationally, and internationally, and see how we can get into some of the challenges that folk are facing individually, that we are facing collectively, but most of all, how we can come together to work together to facilitate both freedom and liberation, for everyone. As we're dealing with so many challenges right now in the United States, whether it is issues of anti-blackness or whether it is issues, of white supremacy, immigration, as well as issues around racial capitalism, whatever the issue is, I believe that our faith must be able to speak to that and be relevant to it. And more importantly, we must bring our faith into proximity with the pain and the challenges that people are facing. After all, that's what this season is all about. For us as Christians celebrating the birth of Jesus Christ, we need to realize that while we can go on and on about when he was born, what is really indisputable is why he was born, where he was born, and how he was born. So we're talking about a Savior that we are worshiping that experienced homelessness, was a migrant. His parents had to face some economic challenges. They were on the run, fleeing from, probably an initial version of ICE, who you never know. But based on the experiences that we are seeing, that so many people are having, around this country and around the world, especially the challenge around migration, I do believe that the message of Christmas, the story, around Christmas and the experience that Mary, Joseph, and Jesus had is so relevant to what's going on right now as it relates to, houseless individuals, as it relates to challenges around migration and immigration, as well as, dealing with the economic challenges that we are facing, because after all, that's everything that he went through. And so our faith is relevant to all of that. So, so many times we try and use the season as a form of escapism, trying to escape, from reality and from what is real. And I just don't believe that's what faith is all about. We have to deal with the darkness that we are surrounded with, and to try and see how we can be the light, become the light, and to shine a light, into the darkness. That's what we try to do here at Faith Without Borders, and so glad that you're joining us. Today is, of course, no exception. We're going to be exploring a very, very powerful and provocative, topic, and I'm so glad that we were able to coordinate our time together with Alejandra Pablos, who is here with us. So glad that she's able to join us. She is a nationally recognized immigrant and reproductive justice community organizer. She has been detained and targeted by the Immigration Customs Enforcement, also known as ICE, multiple times for criminalization, as well as for her advocacy and her activism. She's a powerful sister, and I'm so glad that we're able to connect today, around the conversation of exploring, intersection between criminalization, incarceration, and deportation. So that's a heavy load and a heavy lift, but we can do this because of who we have with us today. So I want to welcome Alejandra with us, and so glad that you're in Los Angeles. Welcome, welcome.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much. I'm so also glad that community organizers exist to be able to make these connections.
Yes.
And we all know that we're making these connections because we have a duty, and that duty is to speak our truth.
Yes.
Our duty is to challenge the narratives of criminalization, challenge the narratives of disposability of people, right? Because we're just switching the narrative of who is disposable at this moment, who is defining power, who's creating laws, right? Who is defining that? So I think it's super important to keep pushing and keep talking about this. And I think the biggest thing at the end of the day is the stigma, right? The shame around criminalization that we carry, and we had no consent in that.
Right. Yeah.
That has nothing to do with actual our livelihood, So yes, my name is Alejandra. I'm actually from Santana, California. I'm from the OC area.
So she's from the OC.
Yeah, and I moved to Tucson, Arizona when I was almost 15. So that's where I kind of grew up. That's where I kind of got informed a little bit about, this is how, depending on your zip code, depending on the color of your skin, right, depending on what area you're at, like this is going to really influence how you're going to be targeted and how your community is going to be over-policed and how you're going to interact with criminalization.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, this whole piece about a person's zip code, impacting how long they're going to live, the quality of their life, impacting the equity that they're going to experience. I mean, that's just real, but it's also ridiculous. In terms of the inequities, that's going on, and the marginalization, around that. Before we go any further, I think it's just appropriate that we want to celebrate and lift up our brother Tadios, who connected us.
Yeah.
He is, with the Black Alliance for Just Immigration. And so we just want to give a shout out to Tadios, for making this connection and for us to kind of be together. So I'm excited we're able to coordinate this and to have this very, very important, conversation around that. You've been, on a national, tour, around that. So, but before we go to all of them, maybe we can just start with, with who you are. We heard a little bit that you, from the OC, and then you moved to the AZ. So just tell us a little bit about, who you are and how, you arrived, at this very, very important work.
Yeah, so who I am is a community organizer. I specifically focus on reproductive justice, because when I got picked up and detained at my probation office for taking a plea that later on turned to be detrimental to my immigration pathway and status, it really, really opened up my eyes to what was going on in my backyard, right? So I really understood then and understood that it was an array of barriers that are actually really limiting and marginalizing communities, right? So when I got picked up by ICE, threatened with deportation, I spent 2 years in an immigration prison. And there is where I found mothers surviving the war on drugs, right? Mothers surviving domestic violence, right? People who actually needed support, but our answer was, because of our punishment culture, our answer was incarceration, right? And, people with money, which is a lot of private corporations that are leading mass incarceration here, have a lot of money to lie to the community and say that people are actually being rehabilitated, right, in these places. And it's always been that there's supposed to be rehabilitation in these prisons, and it's never been that, right? Most folks are idle there. There's more violence there, right? There's more corruption. We know this. We're talking more and more, thankfully, because of organizers and community organizers nationally and locally, about how incarceration actually is violent to all communities, right? And that is not the answer. And we want a world where we get rid of these violent institutions, right? And we start learning how to really talk to one another, have compassion, be able to address harm when there is harm, right? Unfortunately, right now, a set of laws, for example, from 1996, were put in place where really it criminalizes folks. And it doesn't matter how small an interaction with the police can be. It can put you in deportation proceedings, right? So a judge no longer or the courts no longer see a person for like what they're going through or their circumstances. And when we know that more than 150 million people are in poverty in the United States, the most powerful and rich country, we know that it's not individual people's problems. This is systemic, right? We took away funding from mental health institutions, right? We take away funding from education, right? So this is what we have to sit back and really think about. What is really happening, right? Why are we being targeted as poor people? This is a class issue, right? Because even if you have citizenship, you're also living in poor conditions, right? With landlords that are really abusing you and your family, right? You still have Black citizens getting incarcerated for life, right? So it doesn't really protect you from criminalization, right? Your citizenship. So it's about really, really talking about what are those systemic issues, how who's the real enemy, and it's not one another, right? We have to understand who we really have to like challenge and
yeah, and I mean, you know, you talk about the, you know, this whole, you know, challenge around criminalization and the disposition, you know, of being more punitive than being more restorative. You know, Michelle Alexander has done a lot of work, you know, around this, you know, a piece, you know, of course, with her book, The New Jim Crow. But there's a new movie coming out, you know, next month called Just Mercy, you know, that also deals with this. And I was able to be part of you know, advanced reading in the conversation. And I also, you know, did a little bit of, you know, research online around this. And I found, you know, a community read, you know, that Union, you know, a theological seminary in New York did, you know, especially the Episcopal seminary there. And they had a conversation between the president and Michelle Alexander, you know, when we had the screening here that the California Endowment and Liberty Hill Foundation, you know, did at LA Live. You know, we had Patrice there, you know, we had Dr. Ross, you know, several others on that panel. It was just a powerful, fascinating conversation. But there was this whole piece around how in this society there's just we have the propensity, you know, to be punitive instead of, you know, an appetite for being restorative, you know, around that, and how, you know, all of that is just connected with the history, you know, of the United States, you know, and so there is an intersection between incarceration and detention, you know, around it. You want to talk a little bit about that in terms of just where that intersection is, so that we can just be aware of the fact that, you know, it's not about, you know, us being put against each other, but that this is systemic, it is institutional. There is a systemic and institutional, you know, coordination, if you will, around this in terms of who we want to, you know, control, where we want to control them, and while we're doing that, how do we also, you know, make a lot of capital on that, you know, as we move forward. Any thoughts just around that that intersection?
Yeah, I mean, bringing it back before I answer that question, when you were talking about restorative, wanting to have a more restorative place, I also want to challenge that a little bit because, you know, restore to really what, right? When we talk about the history, we have never really lived in a place where there has been no incarceration, right? Or a punishment culture. So we don't even know what that looks like, right? So it's like why people are really, you know, standing strong that we need prisons, right? So it's more about like transforming, right? Really transforming how we think, how transforming and creating new ways, right? Creating alternatives. But yeah, I think for me, it was really clear for me the intersections of criminalization with the penal system and immigration, especially in Arizona. Arizona is one of the highest, toughest sentencing states. It's one of the places one of the 3 states that still has truth in sentencing, which really, really forces folks to really do 85% of their sentence inside without an opportunity to parole out. And this is when we're already being over sentenced, right? Especially in Arizona, where there's a lot of immigrant folks, where we have racial profiling, where we have the regime of Arpaio, right? Where you can just ask people for papers because they look that way. Right. So for us there, it was just very clear, the intersections. For me, I have for example, I got a DUI in 2007. And in Arizona, those are deportable. But here in California, it's not, right? So again, we go back to this thing of like where you live, where you're from, who is actually creating also laws, right, that are placed on you that, again, there's no discretion of these, cops and judges and all that to keep criminalizing you. And it also looks like criminalizing in the court system, right? For my first DUI, I went to, I did work furlough and spent time in 10 cities, spent 2 months there when I saw white people coming in for 24 hours, right? So in Arizona, you don't get pulled over without an ICE patrol car, right? So that's what's just very, very clear. Especially being from Santana, being from the border area, having been able to go back and forth all my life and having to become a legal permanent resident, but knowing that there's hierarchies also, right, imposed on us. And as a legal permanent resident, nothing's permanent about that, right? And they also are able to take that away from me. So that's what I'm fighting right now. I've been fighting my deportation for about 9 years. Wow. For things that I already did, how everybody says, did your time, right? For my first DUI, I did 2 years of supervised probation, right? I ended up spending another 2 years in a private prison immigration for nothing new. Same things, right? So that's what we talk about criminalization. When there's a system of laws, a rhetoric, media, right? The people in power keep defining something. And again, you just, I mean, we were in my community in the south side of Tucson too. I remember like growing up, seeing police at our schools, right? It was normal to see kids with ankle monitors, right? So like when your activities and then your hood, your community, the things that, the way that we are together, like when those things are labeled, criminal and are, over police and criminalized, and you put laws in effect to actually like stop and frisk, right? Like broken windows, all that, like as if that's the answer. That's detrimental. And right now that's what we're fighting, right? There's actually a beautiful thing that we're doing nationally. Something actually super amazing because it's very big. It's a very broad piece of legislation called the New Way Forward. And as community organizers directly impacted by the system and currently fighting our deportations and in collaboration with other legal advocates and movement lawyers that are really like challenging the law, not just working within the law, have created this beautiful New Way Forward Act, which has just been sponsored by Chuy Garcia from Illinois and an array of other sponsors and over 130 some organizations. But I think what's really important is that, again, this is a piece of legislation that's really bold, that, unfortunately is going to scare a lot of folks because it does talk about taking away aggravated felonies as something that's deportable, right? It talks about getting rid of the 1324 and 1325 provisions that actually criminalize when people come into the border and they enter or they re-enter after a deportation. Now they're being federally criminalized, right? And people facing up to 10, 20 years just for entering, which is a civil matter, right? So this act has that, right? Those provision. It also, ends all 287G agreements, which is a collaboration between ICE and local enforcement, whether they're sheriff or or whatever law enforcement you have. But it also ends mandatory detention and deportation. For example, I spent 2 years in Eloy private prison in Arizona because I had drug charges or drug-related things, and that's it. That labeled me. Mandatory detention, right? I was not able to fight. I was labeled not bondable. I had to fight inside with limited resources, right? And so it's just, again, and why? What? Actually, as a matter of fact, people like myself that have made some choices and that have transformed their lives, these are the folks that we do want to be fighting for, right? And again, and every time that I talk about my story, you get the left, right being like, but she did this, and she, or no, they say, but she wants also, because I talk a lot about also women getting paid more, right? Because we do more work, again, as a reproductive justice. I'm challenging ideas, right? Because, again, the system of also oppressing people is like lack of education, lack of access, information, time, all of these things. And I'm just like, what does it look like to think about us like women, the work that we do at home, right? All of these things. I talk about choosing to choose to have reproductive care over my body, right? So I have talked about interrupting pregnancies and all of these things that the far right talks about. That's why they should deport her, right? When it's like, actually, we are fighting for people to have power over their own bodies, right? We actually are fighting for equal pay right now. We don't even have equal pay, again, with men, next to men. So all of the things that people want to like use, like, against us to criminalize us, right? If I use the F word online, that's why I should get deported, right?
Yeah.
Like that doesn't even merit. So I think when it comes to, again, the power of the media to also, be able to enforce all this, that's all you see online for in Law and Order, right? All these shows, you see this like image of these criminals and all this, and that's not who's filling up the prisons. The prisons and jails, those are not who's there. My roommate at Eloy Detention Center was a person who was driving without a license with her partner going to work, and because they were both undocumented, the driver got human smuggling charges.
Wow.
And was inside with me, right? So like those are the people that you find there. So again, it's about pushing back that prisons don't work. Like if we really want to answer harm and answer that violence, we got to ask the people that were harmed what needs to happen. We got to invite those people to make those decisions. And obviously we don't want to invite the police, right? The police is not the answer to everything. Can you believe that if you can't pay your rent, the police gets called? Right? Like if anything happens, the police, that is not the answer, right? That's why we have other people in the community. And that's why we want as a community to be able to make these choices for ourselves and for when harms have happened for the community to be able to address them,
Yeah, and you're right about that. I mean, here in South Los Angeles, we part of a broad coalition called Push LA. And part of that is, one, the resistance, around what law enforcement, has assumed responsibility for, whether they were invited into it or not, but then also to see how we can reimagine what law enforcement need to look like and not leave that up to law enforcement, because their reimagination is just going to be a reinvention of themselves.
Right.
So you're right, in terms of, the reimagination has to be done by those, who've been adversely affected, by the system around it. So it's just powerful to hold these two, aspects, in creative tension with each other. We're here to resist, but even while we're resisting, we're going to reimagine. That reimagination also has to be legislative. That's why I'm excited to hear about the legislation that you mentioned, and we want to make sure that before we finish up, we say more. About that. Let me get to the reproductive justice piece, and I really appreciate the fact that you are talking about reproductive justice and not just reproductive rights, around it, because it is a justice issue for women to be able to have power or the right to power over their bodies, around that. And this incarceration challenge, as well as the deportation challenge and the criminalization challenge, yes, there is a racial aspect to it, but there's also a gender aspect, to it. And so the work that needs to be done, in one sense has to be distinguished, but in other sense has to be connected, because of how, women in general, but particularly Black women, women of color, are affected, by this. Do you want to say a little bit about, in your work, how you've, and even you yourself, having been, detained, how, just share some light around that experience, its uniqueness, and what we need to be aware of as we make sure that we hold that intersection, up as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I am very proud to call myself a reproductive justice organizer. Under that, within that does come fighting for reproductive rights, obviously, and reproductive health. And that's an array of things, right? Reproductive justice is access to information, language, right? Access to the ability to choose and move and migrate and remain. And for me, the reason why I focus on also as a reproductive justice organizer and storyteller, my focus is against state violence, state-sponsored violence. Because as you were mentioning, we were talking, when reproductive justice means, having bodily autonomy over your lives, your body, your sexuality, your reproduction, and so forth, the first immediate threat is what? caging people, policing, right? Because you don't have, there is basically a lot of no judicial process when it comes, right? We've seen a lot in videos. If they ask you for your ID and you get upset and you don't want to, even though you know your rights, oh, you're going down, right? Because you decided to, like, you know, piss a cop off, right? So it's really, that's like the first immediate threat. I literally still get overwhelmed if I see the police behind me, because I know if he talks to me, he decides that he's gonna keep me, that's it, right? No matter if I did nothing, right? So
and that's just the condition that we are living in. You know, in terms of us being, you know, really impacted by, you know, a police state, you know,
absolutely.
In terms of
absolutely. So yeah, so I mean, and I would love to talk about this new report we also have coming out of Eloy called the Carceral State of Arizona, that actually talks about both the you know, prison and the immigration detention center and the harms in the community. But yeah, so that's why I think for me, that's where I focus on all the time, right? Is these laws that are placed upon our bodies, on our communities, that are really, again, marginalizing and criminalizing us more. So when I think about for me, what the biggest thing for me, I actually got pregnant 2 years ago, and I was ready. I was like, okay, I'm totally ready to start a family. And really quickly, you know, my immigration deportation case came up, right? I've been fighting almost 10 years now. And again, just last year, the deportation officers called me and said, you have to turn yourself in. Right. So to be able to really think of somebody who has to live under these conditions, right? Like at any time you can leave, at any time they can ask you to turn yourself in, at any time they can tell you need to leave now. And another time they can tell you, oh, now the political war is over in your country and you've been here for 20 years and you uprooted yourself and now you have to leave. Right. So for me, when I got pregnant, it was like, oh, I have this thing going on. I don't know what's going to happen. Right. I don't know when I'm going to have to go back. You know, you just don't know. And again, being inside is the worst. We already understand that people die there. People are not meant to come home. People are meant to quit and sign their papers and go somewhere they've never been. So for me, it was that's for me the most, like, you know, what I can share about, wow, what does that intersection mean, right? Of like being like a reproductive justice. Like I literally I cannot protect my own body. Right, my body right now belongs to Immigration Customs Enforcement. Right, like I said, in 2018, they called me and said you need to turn yourself in for being at a protest. You know, for being there for my First Amendment. Right, we had the right to be there. I was the only one singled out by ICE that day that got arrested. So I thought about that, and I'm like, no, I have to have an abortion. And if abortions weren't legal, accessible, and affordable, right? What would I have had? A child that I was going to get taken away by the same people that are not allowing me to make a choice over my own body and that are going to, you know, kidnap me once again. So that uncertainty, that's not reproductive justice, right? That fear that you have every day to just be you, that's not reproductive justice. So for me, those are the things that I think about every day. Women and people having to make decisions over their own safety, their own bodies, right? Bodies are like the first places that have been colonized, right? Especially a woman's body. And to me, that was really unfortunate. And, you know, I think about having a family now and I'm still like, but I can't, I have to wait. Like, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if I'm going to get picked up again, if I'm going to be called by a deportation officer, especially doing the work that we're doing. I think at this moment in time, it's super important for us to be defending and speaking up for activists and organizers that are being targeted by deportation, that are being that are being put in prisons for their activism and for speaking up against this racist narrative and rhetoric and this administration. And if we're not really getting our shit together, right, and really getting really being there, talking about the intersections of criminalization, right, our right to just fight for our human dignity, it's gonna be detrimental for us, and it's only gonna even get worse if we cannot protect those people right now out on the front lines, you know. And I think for me, doing, you know, linking up with all my homegirls, being a part of national networks and organizing in the community across the country is what's gonna protect me. Immigration cases are one on public opinion. But I am also very privileged, right? I'm also very privileged with having a platform, with my case and my detention being viral and so forth. But there's millions and thousands of people, right, that don't have that don't have money to fight their deportation cases, to be creative right now. We're going back and opening up and doing post-conviction and figuring out how we can, you know, lower some of my charges that are making me deportable. Like, but that's all like people don't have access to that. So every day I'm so privileged to talk about how my team is building and getting bigger, legislative strategies, right? Comm strategies, legal strategies and all that. But that's also all because we're hustling, and I'm hustling. I'm talking about my story, and I'm sharing my story, and I get people that also want to help. So I feel for the first time also that I'm the most equipped to be fighting under this administration. I feel the most equipped to be challenging and to be having these conversations, which is why I started the podcast, Support Me, Don't Deport Me, where I travel and I meet other organizers in deportation proceedings and organizers that are fighting deportation defense and criminalization. And I sit with them, and we build together a show and an episode that's going to really break down the work that we do and who we are, because all of the time corporate media is never going to talk about who we really are. Yeah. Right. And like, we have to be there. We have to be the ones sitting at the table, writing our own history, right? Documenting the movement. And I'm just super privileged to have friends. And this is why I'm here. This is why I've been here for almost 7-8 days, speaking with folks that have won their deportation cases, right? Because I think that's also a part of the strategy, is to also talk to people that they use certain tools. And, I spoke to some Tung in Santana who got a governor's pardon, right? After being, facing 25 to life. So we have to understand that, like, we can organize for our liberation, right? Even if it's one body at a time. But, Tung got to win his deportation, right? I'm talking to other folks that are in deportation proceedings, figuring out what are their tools and how they're fighting back against the attacks of the administration and the attacks of racist legislation. Mm-hmm. So I'm super blessed, and I hope that everybody catches this. We're planning to launch in March of 2020. I'm still planning to fundraise. The podcast, right? The podcast, yeah. Y'all can totally donate at keepalefree.org to make the trip to Minnesota, where I'll be talking to folks that have also been criminalized in the Cambodian community, and also a trip to Austin to talk about queer folks in detention over there, really organizing against the system as well, and folks fighting asylum. So I think it's important right now to be able to have these conversations and to dissect some of these things. Like you said, it's a very heavy conversation, but we have lives. We are human beings, right, that have gone through some things, and we all have gone through things. So we got to stick together more than ever and not make people disposable. We actually talking about the New Way Forward Act, I actually was talking to a Congress, a representative of Arizona, when I caught him on the Hill when we launched this last week. And I told him, hey, here's this New Way Forward. This bill is going to really rectify the past detrimental separation of families that the set of laws has had. And, we believe we need support instead of deportation. This would blah, 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 right? And then he was like, actually, people do need to be deported. Mm-hmm. And that is the thoughts of some folks, right? Like, people are really, really disconnected from actually people get to migrate everywhere, and move. Like, why people do that? Mm-hmm. People ask me, oh my God, open borders. That's so radical. What? Why people have open borders? They go anywhere in the world and set up. Mm-hmm. They cross back and forth, through my border, right? And I'm just like, I want that too. Yeah. I want you to want that for us too.
Yeah, well, I mean, because I believe that no human being is illegal, and having been born and raised in South Africa, just like borders have been set up here, borders have been set up there. Mm-hmm. That was never part of those who've been there, for years, and so that's why the name of this program is Faith Without Borders, because, of the intention to challenge, this, whole notion around, the invasion, of a place and a people, and then the introduction of an imposter, disposition around those who've been there. Now, all of a sudden, they feel like they don't belong anymore. And then a racialized way of then engaging in nation building, and then undergirding that racialized way of nation building by way of a economic system called racial capitalism. That's why we are where we are, because white supremacy, is about domination. It is about patriarchy, and it is about how to continue to figure out ways to dispose of people while at the same time engage in the accumulation of wealth. That's in so many ways, right. The system that the Glaser that moves, all these, tips of the icebergs that we are dealing with.
The rich are getting richer, right? Organizing themselves really well. And that's why I think it's a war on poor people, on working class, right? On the working people, and I think this is when we got to get stronger than ever. And the U.S. is we work in silos in our movements.
Yeah, and I was going to get to that in terms of just the importance of how do we connect the dots? I mean, how do we, listen to one another's stories and learn from those stories, and then through that, find each other, in one another's stories, and therefore to be able then to link hands to try and see how, it is essential to organize at the intersection, because that contributes to our collective liberation. But it takes time to do that. It was powerful for you to mention, there's just this image, around, the fact that, when you say, when you talk about immigration, that the narrative that's being put out there is that it's only about, Hispanics, yet as a black immigrant, I'm certainly aware of the fact as to how, incarceration, criminalization, and deportation, adversely affect black immigrants, in so many different ways, and we need to be aware of that, and how other communities, are affected, by that. How has it been, for you to connect those dots, as you've traveled, as you've listened to stories, seeing what others have gone through, and connecting that with your own experience? What has that done for you, on this journey, that you've been on?
Yeah, thank you for that question as well. It's been really affirming, because it's, I don't have to have studied or been an academic around in incarceration and capitalism and all of those things, but I have the language because I've lived through it, right? I lived this. I know what I'm talking about because I'm meeting with other folks, And for me, one of my priorities is to be clear that this is not a Latinx issue for folks who identify as Latinx. But it's not for other people that still use Hispanic. That's not true, right? And again, the most vulnerable through this is when there is anti-blackness is Black folks, and I think that's the original reason why I'm actually been in conversation with Thaddeus is because I'm like, okay, I'm trying to organize. I'm trying to meet other Black organizers fighting deportation, right? What does that look? What do those disparities have been to us as well, right? And it's super important. Again, if we don't understand that, anti-Blackness lives within our communities, we've been indoctrinated with that shit, right? Every day we have to wake up and analyze how we are being pro-Black, right? So for me, it's super important to be able to talk about that, and then the privilege, right, that we have even within this system that I'm still facing deportation in. For me, we have to talk again. It's about I can still get jobs or opportunities to work other than Black citizens, right? When people talk about caging little kids, we've been caging little Black kids, right, for so long, right? So why is that not important? Why are we not talking about that, right? And I think being able to have those conversations and all the intersections too, because I organize with the criminal justice movement, right, which is heavily Black-led, organized with immigration movements, with reproductive justice movements, with LGBTQ movements, and really been able to see that also Black immigrants are everywhere in those spaces, right? Because they also are at the intersections of all of those things. When Black folks are over-policed, and as they are everywhere, they're going to be also criminalized when it comes to the immigration system. So yeah, I think at the moment where again we need to stop talking about abolishing just ICE, right, and immigration detention centers. We need to get rid of all cages, all prisons, because that's not the answer, right? That is not the answer. And you know what, folks, y'all also don't have to have the answer right there and then, Because you know what? This was centuries of criminalization, of systemic power infiltrating and creating an array of ways that is going to criminalize us, right? Along with laws. So we don't have one. We don't, as organizers, we're not going to have just one answer. As people that know that this is not it, you don't have to have an answer. You just have to know that this is not it. And when people make bold statements about abolishing ICE, abolishing prisons, it's because we're ready for something new. Abolishers also create. Right? When we get rid of something, there needs to be something created, right? So that's what we're working. That's what the conversations that we're having.
Yeah, and you're right about that. That's why earlier we talked about that, resistance, reimagination piece, so that we, so that there is a vision we can cast beyond abolishment. But that we must be at the forefront of this re-envisioning. Otherwise, it's just going to be a reinvention.
Right.
And we've seen that with law enforcement. And the prosecutorial system, all over the place, in terms of that. So I wanted you to say a little bit about, the work that you're doing around, a community defense, education, and challenging narratives, in these three areas of deportation, criminalization, and, what was the third one we were talking about? Incarceration. Can you say a little bit about, that work that you're doing?
Yeah. I mean, even through this deportation case of mine, right, when I travel to share my story, my team and I have created workshops around telling the reproductive justice story of what is this incarceration journey of mine, or fight against incarceration. So what we do is, we get together. Obviously, we have our strategy meetings, and we come out and we do workshops across the country, but also because we know those spaces are not accessible. Conferences, particular spaces are not accessible to the community. We also organize locally with wherever we're at, again, based off of the connections that we do have. I use a lot of my social media platform, right, to connect with folks, always answering folks' questions, right, really sharing everything that I go through, all the barriers, all the good stuff. So I think that's been another way where we've been able to really, again, organize ourselves to have these meetups, these community spaces where, for me, community defense just means knowing your rights, knowing your dignity, right, knowing the agency you have. Because unfortunately, we learn our rights when we've already been criminalized, right? When we know that there's this thing that's coming after us. And to me, I'm like, wow, we should have learned all of this stuff in elementary school. Right? Like, oh, wow, I didn't even know about certain things, right? Or even just laws. I mean, there's a shitload of laws, right? Like so many. And you just don't know, right? And you just really don't understand too, how, as you're growing up, what are the things you need to do to really protect yourself also from being criminalized, right? If I would have known certain things, I would have made other decisions. I stand by that. And, So for example, having conversations and building with people that want to start teachings around abolition, right? I don't belong particularly to an organization. I'm not, particularly being funded. It's, it's a job that you do as volunteer most of the time, right? So we're having conversations around what the community needs, and we need these conversations about abolition, right? We need these conversations around ending cash bail, right? And why just because you're poor, you shouldn't just not have due process or be inside waiting. Instead of being outside, figuring out how to we gotta get a best defense for yourself, right? Which that's what it is about, right? Justice. But doing fundraisers. I just last year I started a Anything for Justice fundraiser at the club to also normalize this, right? I had the DJ talking about donate. We're having a fundraiser. Alejandra, the organizer, such and such, is here. Donate to women in Perryville to give commissary money, right? Because again, it's about being consistent with your community, consistent with planting these seeds, right? And really again normalizing it, right? So we raised $700 and something at the club.
So you turned a regular party into a conscious party.
Yes, everything. It's a lifestyle, right? Because again, I'm not safe. I'm not free if we all are not, right? And we have a lot of work to do. The fact of the matter is, people like us are small. Are a small percentage when it comes to the millions of people that are not really doing the work to intellectually develop themselves, right? People who have a lot of privilege, who don't want to talk about privilege, right? And also that keep reinforcing these stereotypes that are allowing us to criminalize one another, right? So I'm also challenging daily people in my life, my family, to also stop judging, decriminalize, right? Unlearn, uncolonize.
Yeah, I mean, you're really right. I mean, stigmatization is just such a disease. That we all just have to be healed from, and how it not only affects those who are being stigmatized, but also the stigmatizer. Because that individual operates, either out of ignorance or out of arrogance, and those two together can be very, very dangerous.
And out of fear, right? Again, the people empowered to be able to put these like labels and these images and ideas for people to continue that for so long. It's like, wow, the power and like what the work that it takes to deconstruct it. It's a lot of work, right? It's a lot of work. But we got to do the tough work.
So give us a little update on your case. Right now, you created Keep Ali Free. Tell us a little bit about that, so we can, kind of help the audience connect with that. And then, we also want to, see if you can say a little bit about that podcast that's launching next year. Support Me, Don't Deport Me. But let's start with just, where you are on your case, and then, the website, Keep Ali Free.
Okay. So currently right now we're actually appealing. I went to court last year. Like I said, I've been in deportation proceedings for a lot of years now. But when you organize, you figure out different ways of relief. So we actually tried to fight for political asylum. I'm Mexicana. I'm from the northern areas of Mexico. And obviously I've never lived there. So we tried to fight for political asylum, saying that also because of my activism, because of my reproductive justice, my abortion work, in a country where it's mostly illegal, and people die, right? Activists die
your life would be in danger
for various reasons, not just like abortion, but various human rights defenders get killed and by the same state, right? So we actually, I actually have a fear, a legit fear, and it's super sad, right? Because again, anyways, so we went to court and I got ordered deported. The judge said that my rehabilitation and transformation from those, charges back in the early 2000s, were still, I still had to transform from them, and I deserved the record I have, and that I basically deserved deportation. So we're going to appeal that. It's a really slow process right now, so I'll keep y'all updated. But the slower the process is, the longer I have to be here, the longer we get to be creative and strategize around how we're going to fight. There's a couple of things that we're doing on the legal side, which are really exciting. So some good things are happening again, because I'm working with lawyers to like reevaluate, right? Check the work of the past lawyers. I have many lawyers. We've been paying a lot of lawyers, and in immigration, you don't get no public defenders or
Right.
So it's really, really tough. And again, people don't know immigration law because of its complexities and because of how expansive it is. Like, people make mistakes all the time, right? So I was placed in deportation proceedings because I pled guilty to something that I thought was not going to put me in immigration proceedings. Right. But then here I am. So right now we're in appeals. So stay tuned for that. And I think the only thing is that we're trying again to be creative on the legal side, but mostly keep the organizing going. We've been fundraising for 2020. So I can keep being in spaces, keep coming to communities to build with communities, build more workshops around criminalization. I really love working with community organizers that have built their own workshops too, that then that really talk about the work that I'm doing, and then we get together and then we present it together.
And that's a way of using storytelling as well, to basically broaden, people's awareness, but also broaden their circle of concern. Around.
Yes, I actually wish I would have invited you. I was really busy. But yesterday, for example, I had I'm actually just got funded, and I'm working with some of my creative writer friends to write an immigration, a theater play, a theater documentary style play around my incarceration and immigration. And we're in the phase right now to transcribe and translate all of these letters from inside, like letters from my mother, from my family, from homegirls inside. And they're just really, really deep, right? We talk about daily life and just wow. And letters from my mother, her, organizing her ass off to get me home. So really emotional stuff. So I ended up opening it up. So when we talk about like, what is the work that you're doing, is about like, again, opening up this process so everybody can learn from it, right? Everybody can share. And I opened up the process at a community organization, the California Youth Justice Alliance. CIJA opened up the space, and we had a transcribing work session and translating. Wow. So like about 12 people showed up. We had some food, some champurrado, and we got to translate and transcribe things. And people got to ask me questions. I got to share about some time inside. People got to see, wow, this is how your mom and your tias loved on you, right? Because they, we got to laugh in a lot of jokes of these letters. But we also got to read poems of women that were like, that were in there using their time to create beautiful poems to one another, right? And I received so many letters from them. So just to also see the beauty of, again, the people that are in there. One thing about incarceration and this experience for me is that it made me fall in love with people all over again.
Wow.
Right? It really made me fall in love with people all over again. And this is what the community defends knowledge and all that is about opening up and no more stigma. Like my mom at the beginning was lying. When I was taken by ICE, they told them I was backpacking somewhere because they were so embarrassed to talk about because they don't even know what this is, right? This is, again, this stigma, this idea, like you don't want to be labeled that.
And this narrative that's out there that needs to be really dismantled and destroyed. Yeah.
Right. So this has completely transformed everybody around me, right? Completely transformed me. I don't know what else I'm going to do for the rest of my life. I'm going to always fight ICE and police and incarceration.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, truth, however painful, is transformative, in terms of that. Tell us about the Keep Alley Free. Is that a website that folk can connect with and kind of get more information?
Yeah, so the Keep Alley Free the Keep Alley Free campaign has a person. It's a website that's also going to be hosting the Don't Deport Me, Support Me podcast. What I think for me is I'm fighting this deportation. We're learning how to fight this deportation. Again, there's not a lot of people that are being public that are talking about their deportation case. So this is very crucial. But it's also for me, what is our theory of change? Right? Like, how is this experience of mine going to be able to help after I win my case? Because we're going to win. That is going to happen. We're going to be starting different ways of folks to be able to abolish their deportation cases. So for me, it's an opportunity to put all of the places that I go and speak, speeches that I've written, interviews, all of the work that we do, all our workshops, we put it on this website, and we have a blog there. It talks about who I am. It talks about the updates. It's an opportunity for people to donate. Again, nobody's paying me to do this work. I'm always fundraising.
So we definitely want to advocate for support, and you've been seeing some of the images, as we've been broadcasting. So from the website. So just to show the work, those who are part of the movement that's supporting you, and just images of and how to connect with you, both through the website and on social media.
Yeah, so the website again is keepalefree.org, and it's also in Spanish and in English. So there's an opportunity for you to also, if you learn better in Spanish, or for non-English speaking folks, it's also accessible. And so on Instagram, y'all can find me as SORALE, SOR__ALE. And on Twitter, which I'm also really interested on Twitter, is Ale La Plebe, ALELAPLEBE. And y'all can find me there. There's going to be a lot of work that we're still going to be doing in 2020. There's a lot of conversations around this new bill, this new Forward Act. So please, if y'all can Google it, I can actually send you stuff so maybe you can share it out with your folks. But we're really going to be talking about pushing in-district visits to make sure that we're talking about this. And I'm hoping to also...
And there's a hashtag for the bill, right?
The hashtag New Way Forward.
Hashtag New Way Forward. And quickly tell us again, a little bit about the bill, and then folk can, of course, go and get some more information about it.
Yeah, so this bill is addressing the 1996 immigration bill that pretty much expanded the way that folks can be funneled into the pipeline. It really rectifies all the harm that it's done because there was laws that allowed people with certain charges to just be mandatory detention, mandatory deportation without due process, right? Without a person actually going through a legal judicial process. So it also ended discretion from the judges. So we were no longer seen as people coming to court. We were seen as convictions. And we all know we are not our convictions. We are not our past choices. But this New Way Forward advances the following key principles towards dismantling those. And it ends mandatory immigration detention. It ends the laws that create automatic pipelines. It ends the practices of the local police engaging in immigration enforcement. It decriminalizes migration by repealing criminal prosecution for illegal reentry and entry, which is why you saw a lot of kids in detention And it also creates a process for people previously ordered deported to also apply for the opportunity to come home. A lot of folks in the criminal justice system are talking about reentry, right? I am also, have been reentering after deportation, but also folks that have been deported should have the right to also reenter back into the communities where their families are. It also ends automatic deportation and summary proceedings for people who've had contact with the criminal legal system. I think it's important to understand that it does not matter whether right now it's irrelevant for us to be like, oh, but it was nonviolent charges or it was violent. It does not matter. You are being targeted by deportation if you are a undocumented or non-citizen. I'm different from an undocumented person because I actually had documents. We had a legal permanent resident, but now we're non-citizens with charges. Right, while other undocumented folks have never maybe had any. Right. So we are still deporting and criminalizing again people who've had this citizenship, right? This hierarchy that the government has imposed on us. So I think this bill is great. I'm glad that somebody from Chicago picked it up because of the work that organizers in Chicago and Illinois have been doing. Right, that it's ground zero right there for the intersections of criminalization. Right, so Black and Brown and Palestinian and all the communities are working really hard. So I'm glad Chuy Garcia picked this up. I'm glad that there's a tons. I mean, I can leave this here, but we have a lot of co-sponsors. So if y'all are interested in seeing who's already co-sponsored, and if your rep has not co-sponsored, I can leave this behind.
Yeah, let's see. Did our rep co-sponsor?
Who's your rep?
Karen Bass. Okay, I don't want to call my rep out, but I wouldn't be surprised if she's not part of this because of who she is. So
yes,
but we'll definitely pick it up and try and see how we can get it to some of our folks.
Yes, and this is great due to the work of like the Immigrant Network Justice Coalition that organizes a lot of national organizations like Just Future Laws, which is an organization of movement lawyers that are being trained to actually fight unjust laws, Immigration Deportation Defense Project, folks in New York that have been leading work around defending LPRs, for folks with legal permanent resident card, the Immigration Legal Resource Center, and other folks that have done a lot of pro bono work that really help community organizers and people in deportation proceedings, even with convictions. So this is just like this is work that has been going on for like almost 20 years, and it's finally, here, almost getting a bill number. Really, really exciting. It's the work of organizers with movement lawyers and legal advocates.
Okay. Yeah, man, I see some of the reps here, of course, AOC, my former rep, Barbara Lee, she's on here. I see, of course, Rashida Tlaib, is on it. So several folk are on here. We'll make sure that this gets to our reps, so we can make sure that we on that to support because legislative change is critical.
And immigration is a federal issue, right? So it's important we do local work to keep our community safe.
But you got to connect it, with every aspect, around this. I mean, California, of course, is a sanctuary state, but you're right. We're dealing with some national pieces that we have to connect with, around that. Do you have any, final words for us? I'm so glad. Again, thanks to Tadios for connecting us and for having this fascinating and powerful and inspirational conversation, with you. But any final thoughts before I close us out?
No, just thank you to everybody who's open to have these conversations and listening to this podcast. I mean, these are the people that I want to get to meet and be in relation with, because if we're not pushing back, if we're not saying we want better and we want more, and this is not it, we're gonna keep, silence is actually hurting a lot of people. So just stay tuned for Support Me, Don't Deport Me. I'll be sharing. You can subscribe to the website keepalefree.org to get any updates and follow this journey, this campaign, because we will win this case and we will be able to replicate for many other thousands of people facing deportation.
Absolutely. We're so glad that we were able to have Alejandra Pablos with us. Certainly, what she's experiencing is a microcosm of what thousands, hundreds of thousands of people are experiencing, and not just, in the United States, but all around the world, as we see the movement of people taking place and the migration of people taking place for a variety of reasons, whether it is because of political unrest, or whether it is because of, economic, instability, or even, whether it is because of, climate change, and natural disasters taking place, around the world. So we're glad that she was able to join us, here at Faith Without Borders, where we basically, contend that no human being, is illegal. And for us, the theory of change really starts with the affirmation of our shared humanity. If we have the courage to engage in restoring people's humanity, we will then realize that they have a right, to, live. They have a right, to be, equally protected under the law. They have a right, to movement, and the right to, power over and protection, of their bodies. That is so critical for us. And so during this, holiday season, today, is the start of Hanukkah, which is about light. That's a Jewish, holiday is about light. As we see darkness, just continuing to encroach, into the lives of individuals and communities, we want to make sure that we can be the light and become the light. And part of our message, around Christmas, is, about TLC. We want to continue to see how we can pursue truth, how we can let love lead, and how we can have a disposition of compassion as we do the work that we've been called to do. So thank you for joining us. Our conversation was around exploring the intersection between criminalization, incarceration, and deportation, and to see how we can organize at that intersection so that we can continue to reimagine and reposition ourselves for our collective liberation. I've been your host, Pastor Calvin Sauls. Thanks for joining us. Let's keep on keeping on.